The manager insulted the quiet old man, not knowing he was the CEO's long-lost brother. And he just bought the company. The plush, soundproofed walls of the executive boardroom seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, a stark contrast to the casual disdain etched across the faces of those assembled. Marcus Finch, regional manager, a man whose tailored suit seemed to shrink under the weight of his own pompous self-importance, leaned back in his chair, a sneer playing on his lips. His expensive watch glinted under the recessed lighting, a symbol of the wealth he so openly flaunted, the wealth he believed defined his very being. Across from him, at the head of the impossibly long, polished mahogany table, sat a figure who, to the uninitiated, appeared to be nothing more than an elderly, disheveled janitor, his worn hands clasped loosely before him. A faint scent of floor wax and industrial cleaner seemed to cling to his threadbare jacket, an almost imperceptible detail that only served to deepen Marcus's dismissive grimace. Yet, a peculiar light flickered in the old man's eyes, a light that spoke of amusement, of vast, unimaginable power held tightly in reserve, a power so profound it could shatter the very foundations of this opulent room. "And what, pray tell, is your business here, old man?" Marcus scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension, not bothering to mask his contempt. He gestured dismissively at the figure, an unspoken command for security to remove this unwelcome intrusion, a clear signal to his subordinates that this was an absurd waste of their valuable time. "Perhaps you've wandered into the wrong meeting. This is for decision-makers." A ripple of forced laughter went around the table, dutifully provided by his sycophantic subordinates, their eyes darting between Marcus and the old man, each hoping to catch the manager's approving gaze. The air grew heavy with their collective, manufactured amusement, a performance designed to reinforce Marcus's absolute authority and their own self-serving loyalty. The old man, however, remained unfazed. He simply smiled, a slow, knowing smile that seemed to unravel the very fabric of their smug certainty, a smile that hinted at secrets they couldn't possibly fathom. "My business, Mr. Finch," he began, his voice surprisingly robust for his age, carrying a quiet strength that momentarily cut through the room's manufactured bravado, "is to tell you that the game, as you know it, is over." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a prophecy delivered from an unexpected source, yet they were met with further derision, a fresh wave of snickering and eye rolls. They saw only an impertinent fool, a senile burden, daring to speak out of turn. "Over?" Marcus chuckled, a harsh, grating sound, like stones grinding against each other. What could a custodian, possibly know about our game? Perhaps you've been cleaning one too many dusty offices, hallucinating grand conspiracies. His eyes, cold and devoid of empathy, scanned the old man from head to toe, lingering on his threadbare jacket and worn-out shoes. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in mentally cataloguing the old man's apparent poverty, contrasting it with his own carefully curated image of success. The other managers mirrored his amusement, their faces a tableau of self-satisfaction and dismissive superiority. They saw only an old fool, a senile burden, a man utterly insignificant in their gleaming corporate world. The irony of their blindness was almost unbearable. They had no idea that the very ground beneath their feet was about to give way, that the humble janitor before them held their fates, and the fate of this entire monolithic company, firmly in his calloused hands. The narrator, observing this scene from a vantage point of knowing all, could not help but feel a certain ironic delight. Oh, how quickly their smiles would vanish. The journey to this pivotal moment had been long, paved with the bitter ashes of disillusionment and the gnawing ache of betrayal. Caleb Thorne, a name whispered with reverence in the annals of business, was a titan, a visionary who, alongside his younger brother, Arthur, had co-founded Viridian Innovations decades ago. He remembered the boundless energy, the late nights fueled by cheap coffee and shared dreams in a cramped garage, the exhilarating feeling of building something meaningful from nothing. Their shared dream had been audacious, to create a company that not only pushed the boundaries of technology but did so with integrity, fostering a community of innovation and mutual respect. Viridian wasn't just a company, it was a philosophy, a living testament to what could be achieved when intellect met empathy. They had pioneered groundbreaking AI for sustainable energy, developed ethical data privacy protocols that became industry standards, and even initiated philanthropic programs that uplifted underserved communities. For years, Viridian had been a beacon, a shining example of corporate responsibility, a place where employees felt valued, their ideas cherished, their well-being prioritized. But time, as it often does, had a cruel way of twisting dreams into unrecognizable nightmares. As Caleb, now 70, had gradually receded from the daily operations, entrusting more and more to Arthur, a subtle but insidious shift had begun. It wasn't an overnight change, but a slow, creeping erosion, like rust eating away at steel. Arthur, once his kindred spirit, his inseparable partner in both vision and execution, had become consumed by the very beast they had sought to tame, profit. Caleb remembered the first time he saw it, a flicker of something cold and calculating in Arthur's eyes during a board meeting about a potential merger that felt ethically questionable. The core values of Viridian, once its bedrock, had been slowly eroded, replaced by quarterly reports, aggressive market shares, and a ruthless, almost predatory, pursuit of the bottom line. The once vibrant innovation hubs became cutthroat departments vying for resources, the open-door policy morphed into a maze of bureaucratic hurdles, and the once celebrated employee benefits were quietly trimmed, deemed unnecessary overhead. Caleb watched from afar, a silent, increasingly heartbroken observer, as Viridian Innovations transformed into a soulless leviathan, devouring smaller companies with predatory acquisitions, laying off loyal employees for marginal gains, and fostering a cutthroat internal culture where compassion was seen as weakness and ambition was worshipped as the ultimate virtue. His once vibrant brother, Arthur, had become a stranger, his eyes now reflecting the cold, calculating gleam of a corporate machine rather than the warm glow of a passionate innovator. Caleb recalled their increasingly strained phone calls, the awkward silences, the way Arthur would quickly pivot any discussion about company culture to impressive revenue growth. Attempts to reason with Arthur had been futile, met with dismissive platitudes about market realities and necessary evolutions, as if the very human cost of their new direction was simply a quantifiable, acceptable loss. Caleb had seen the human cost of this transformation, the fear in the eyes of employees during town halls, the endless pursuit of perfection that led to burnout, the blatant disregard for ethical practices that once defined them as a company. He had heard whispers from former colleagues, now disillusioned, about the toxic atmosphere, the constant pressure, the feeling of being just another cog in an uncaring machine. His heart, once swelling with pride for what they had built, now felt heavy with a profound sense of loss, a deep disappointment that bordered on despair. He questioned everything, his legacy, his trust, the very nature of humanity itself. Had the pursuit of wealth truly stripped everyone of their decency? Or were there still sparks of genuine integrity left, embers waiting to be rekindled in the ashes of their once great company? The question gnawed at him, a relentless torment. The idea for his grand, elaborate test had not come suddenly, but rather simmered for months, born from a desperate need for answers, a last-ditch effort to understand what had become of his life's work. Caleb, a man who had always believed in understanding the root cause, in diagnosing the illness before prescribing the cure, knew that he could not simply swoop in as the all-powerful founder and impose his will. That would only breed resentment, not true change. He needed to see Viridian not from the gilded cage of a boardroom, where carefully curated reports and manufactured smiles hid the truth, but from its very foundations, from the perspective of those most vulnerable to its callous practices. He needed to understand the true nature of the people who now comprised his once beloved company, to feel the pulse of its corrupted heart. His advanced age, ironically, became his greatest asset. At 70, with a lifetime of wisdom etched onto his face and a body that had begun its natural decline, he was invisible to the ambitious, the ruthless. He was easily dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, precisely what he needed to observe the raw, unfiltered truth. The disguise was meticulously planned, down to the smallest detail. He sold off a significant portion of his personal assets, funneling the funds through a series of offshore accounts, effectively making himself, on paper, a man of modest means, a ghost in the corporate machine he had built. He acquired a small, unassuming apartment in a quiet, working-class neighborhood, miles away from his sprawling estate, a place where no one would ever connect Elias Vance to the legendary Caleb Thorne. He traded his bespoke suits for second-hand clothes, his polished leather shoes for worn-out sneakers, even practiced tying his laces in a less refined knot. He practiced a slight stoop, a slower gait, a weary look in his eyes that would invite pity rather than suspicion, a humble posture that would make him seem less of a threat, less of a person worth noticing. He spent weeks perfecting the quiet cough, the slight tremor in his hands, the unassuming way he carried himself. It was a complete immersion, a shedding of his old identity to embrace a new, utterly anonymous one. Why a janitor? The choice was deliberate, almost poetic. Janitors were the eyes and ears of any organization, privy to whispered conversations after hours, discarded documents in bins, and the true atmosphere of a workplace when the senior staff believed no one important was watching. They saw the company from the ground up, cleaned up its messes, both literal and metaphorical, moving through the shadows, observing without being observed. It was the ultimate test of character. How would he, a seemingly helpless, elderly man, be treated by the very people he had once empowered, by the managers and executives who now operated with such impunity? It was a pilgrimage into the heart of his own creation, a search for the last vestiges of the soul he believed Viridian had lost. And while he embarked on this profound personal mission, another, far grander plan was already in motion. The long-lost brother had not just bought the entire company, a secret he guarded with the ferocity of a hidden tiger, leveraging decades of strategic investments and an ironclad network of financial allies. He was first going to cleanse it from within, starting with the very top, removing the malignant cells. He would reveal his true self only when the lesson had been learned, when the rod had been exposed, and when the true lights within the darkness had been found. The initial application process for the janitorial position was, for Caleb, a masterclass in corporate dismissiveness, a perfect example of the very dehumanization he sought to expose. He had chosen a branch office of Viridian, far enough from the main headquarters to be beyond the immediate recognition of anyone who might remember the original co-founder, yet close enough for its internal culture to be a true reflection of the larger entity. He arrived for his interview, a meticulously crafted persona of a humble, elderly man named Elias Vance, his worn clothes and quiet demeanor drawing the immediate, palpable contempt of Marcus Finch, the regional manager. The waiting room was sterile, cold, filled with the nervous energy of younger, ambitious applicants, none of whom spared the old man more than a fleeting, dismissive glance. Marcus, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his arrogance, did not even bother to sit properly behind his large, imposing desk, a behemoth of polished steel and dark wood. He leaned back, his feet propped up on a lower drawer, his eyes scanning Caleb's application with an almost performative disdain, a sneer plastered across his face. Elias Vance, is it? Marcus drawled, mispronouncing the name deliberately, drawing out the syllables as if tasting something unpleasant. 70 years old. And you want to clean toilets? Empty bins? He laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor, a sound designed to belittle. Do you even know what a mop is, old man? Or will you be mistaking it for your walking stick? The casual cruelty of his words struck Caleb, not with surprise, but with a renewed sense of purpose. This was precisely the kind of man he needed to observe. Caleb, as Elias, merely blinked slowly, his face carefully schooled into an expression of humble resignation. He had practiced this, the blank stare, the slight tremor of a hand, the quiet subservience. I am capable, sir. I've worked hard my whole life. His voice was soft, unassuming, a stark contrast to the booming confidence Marcus exuded. Capable? Marcus snorted, pushing the application across the desk with a single finger, as if repulsed by the paper itself. You're a liability, Elias. A fall risk. A workers' comp claim waiting to happen. What makes you think Viridian, a company on the cutting edge of everything, needs a fossil like you? He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air, thick with humiliation, relishing the power he held over this seemingly helpless individual. "We need efficiency, speed, young blood. Not wisdom and experience, as you so quaintly put it on your application. We have algorithms for that now." He then turned his gaze towards a younger assistant, Bethany, barely out of college, who stood by the door, observing the interaction with a mixture of discomfort and practiced neutrality, avoiding eye contact with Elias. "Remind me, Bethany, what's the average age of our workforce? 30? 35? Not 70, I assure you." Bethany offered a weak, unconvincing smile, clearly wanting to disappear. Despite Marcus's public belittling, questioning his capabilities and mocking his age, seeing him as nothing more than a potential liability, Caleb maintained his composure. He simply nodded, absorbing every cruel word, every dismissive gesture. This was precisely what he had come to witness. The callousness, the blatant disregard for human dignity, it was all here, laid bare, a festering wound in the heart of his company. Marcus, in his arrogant ignorance, was a textbook example of the rot that had permeated his company. Miraculously, or perhaps, for Caleb, predictably, he was hired. Marcus, it turned out, had a peculiar, almost sadistic, sense of humor. He decided to take a chance on Elias purely to demonstrate to his younger, more impressionable staff what rock bottom looked like, and how easily even the most desperate individuals could be exploited. The regional manager saw an opportunity to pay minimum wage for a physically demanding job, knowing full well the old man would likely quit or be fired within weeks, offering him another chance to ridicule the elderly and their misplaced sense of worth. It was a cruel calculation, but one that fit perfectly into Caleb's secret plan. The irony was palpable. Marcus believed he was exploiting Elias, when in fact, Elias was exploiting Marcus's very nature for a far greater purpose. Over the next few weeks, Caleb, as Elias, observed the intricate dance of hierarchy and hypocrisy within the Viridian branch. He swept floors, emptied bins, and cleaned restrooms, all the while a silent observer, a ghost in the machine. He witnessed Marcus's reign of terror firsthand. Marcus would frequently berate employees in front of others, his voice booming through the open-plan office, echoing off the glass partitions. One morning, he publicly humiliated a new marketing intern for a minor typo in a presentation slide, tearing apart her work, mocking her intelligence until she was on the verge of tears, her face flushed with shame. Another time, he deliberately withheld a promised bonus from a dedicated sales team that had exceeded their targets, claiming unexpected budget cuts, only to splurge on a lavish, expense account-funded lunch for himself and his favored sycophants later that week, a decadent display of self-indulgence. Caleb, in his janitor's uniform, would sweep past, his eyes absorbing every detail, his heart growing heavier with each display of cruelty, yet his resolve strengthening, solidifying his purpose. He felt the pain of those employees as if it were his own, a deep, resonant ache. He saw the fear in the eyes of the employees, the forced smiles, the quiet resignation, the palpable tension that permeated every corner of the office. He heard the hushed whispers in the break room about Marcus's latest tirades, the desperate attempts to avoid his gaze, the frantic efforts to please him, hoping to escape his wrath. The office was a pressure cooker, an environment where empathy was a weakness and self-preservation was the only rule. People hoarded information, sabotaged colleagues, and worked crippling hours, all driven by the fear of Marcus's unpredictable fury. Marcus embodied everything Caleb had come to despise about the new Viridian, a mirror reflecting the very values Arthur had seemingly adopted. Amidst this landscape of greed and indifference, there was Serafina. She was a junior assistant, barely in her mid-20s, constantly burdened by an impossible workload. Her desk was perpetually overflowing with files, her phone seemed to ring incessantly with demands, and she often stayed late, long after Marcus and the other managers had departed, her face pale with exhaustion, the only sound the soft click of her keyboard. Caleb would observe her as he emptied the bins near her desk, a silent, almost invisible presence. He noticed her quiet efficiency, her polite demeanor even when clearly stressed, her gentle way of speaking to clients on the phone, a stark contrast to the harsh tones he often heard. She would often leave a small, handwritten note for the cleaning staff if she'd made a small mess, a gesture of thoughtfulness that no one else bothered with. One particularly grueling afternoon, Caleb, as Elias, was struggling to push a heavy cart laden with cleaning supplies through a narrow corridor. His back ached, a genuine symptom that his disguise enhanced, adding to the authenticity of his stoop, and he momentarily paused, leaning against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Just then, Serafina emerged from an office, a precarious stack of folders threatening to topple from her arms. She saw him, her brow furrowed with immediate concern, a genuine empathy in her expression that was rare in this building. "Mr. Vance, are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft, devoid of the usual rush or curtness he encountered. She didn't wait for an answer, didn't hesitate, but carefully placed her folders on a nearby ledge, prioritizing his immediate well-being over her own urgent tasks. Without a word, she moved to his side and, with surprising strength for her slight frame, helped him steady the cart. "Here, let me help you with that. It looks quite heavy." Her touch was gentle, not at all patronizing, merely helpful. Caleb, touched by her unprompted gesture, a small act that shone like a beacon in the pervasive gloom of the office, simply nodded, grunting a quiet, "Thank you, miss." A small warmth began to spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't realized he had missed so deeply. Later that day, as he was cleaning the break room, wiping down the counters and sweeping up stray coffee grounds, Serafina entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She approached him, a small, genuine smile gracing her tired face, her eyes still reflecting the exhaustion of her day but now softened by a quiet kindness. "Mr. Vance, you've been working so hard," she said, her voice gentle, almost a whisper. "I just made myself a cup of coffee, and I thought you might like one too. It's been a long day for all of us." She held out a warm mug to him, the steam curling invitingly. Caleb looked at the cup, then at her. Her eyes, though tired, held a warmth that was conspicuously absent in the eyes of almost everyone else in the office. This was not a gesture seeking favor, or recognition, or even a simple thank you. It was pure, unprompted kindness, a small offering of genuine humanity that stood in stark contrast to the manager's pervasive cruelty. He took the mug, his fingers brushing hers, and felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years, a feeling of hope, of profound relief. "Thank you, Serafina," he said, his voice a little gruffer than intended, trying to hide the lump in his throat, the unexpected welling of tears behind his eyes. He saw her flinch slightly at the sound of her name, then soften as she realized he meant no offense, only sincerity. She simply smiled, a tired but utterly sincere expression, and then hurried back to her desk, the stack of papers still awaiting her, a testament to her quiet resilience. This small, seemingly insignificant moment sealed Caleb's resolve. He had seen the rot, the pervasive greed, the dehumanizing ambition that had consumed his company. He had witnessed the fear, the callous disregard, the systemic breakdown of every value he had once held dear. But he had also seen the spark of integrity, the flicker of empathy in Serafina, a tiny flame refusing to be extinguished by the darkness surrounding it. She was a testament that not all was lost, that true character could still shine through even the darkest of environments. He knew then that Marcus Finch's reign was about to end, that the corrupt edifice would be torn down. The stage was set. The long-lost brother who had just bought the entire company, the man they knew as Elias Vance, the humble janitor, was ready to reveal his true self. The reckoning was at hand, and the narrator, with a knowing smirk, anticipated the coming storm, a storm of justice years in the making. The air in the boardroom was thick with a palpable, almost suffocating, silence as Caleb Thorne, no longer Elias Vance, the humble janitor, but the formidable, reclusive tycoon, stood at the head of the table. He had walked in not moments after dismissing Marcus Finch's sneering remarks, flanked by 2 impeccably dressed figures, his chief legal counsel, Mr. Alastair Reed, a man whose reputation preceded him as a corporate shark with an unmatched win record, and his personal security detail, 2 hulking figures whose presence immediately commanded attention. The sudden appearance of Reed, a lawyer known for his ruthless corporate takeovers, had sent a ripple of unease through the room, a tremor of apprehension that spread from manager to manager, but Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance, had still not grasped the true gravity of the situation. He just saw an old man trying to make a scene. "I believe you were just asking about my business here, Mr. Finch," Caleb said, his voice no longer merely robust, but resonating with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding empires, each word precisely weighted, carrying the full force of his hidden power. He gestured to Mr. Reed with a subtle nod. "Alistair, if you please." Alistair Reed, a man with the calm demeanor of a predator, his eyes sharp and unblinking, stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the bewildered faces of the managers, lingering for a fraction of a second on Marcus. "Good morning, gentlemen, Ms. Davies," he began, his voice clear and precise, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "My name is Alistair Reed, and I represent Mr. Caleb Thorne, co-founder of Viridian Innovations. As of exactly 9 a.m. this morning, Mr. Thorne has successfully completed the acquisition of all outstanding shares, gaining full, controlling ownership of Viridian Innovations." He paused, allowing the monumental weight of his words to sink in. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Gasps erupted, small choked sounds of disbelief. Faces, previously smug and self-satisfied, went ashen, drained of all color. Marcus Finch, who had been about to unleash another sarcastic retort, a witty put-down he had already formulated in his mind, froze mid-breath, his jaw slack, his carefully composed arrogance crumbling into a pathetic tableau of shock. He looked at Caleb, then at Reed, then back at Caleb, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization, a cold dread seeping into his very bones. T.H. Thorne? Caleb Thorne? But that's impossible. He's retired. He's a recluse. And you're the janitor. Elias Vance. The accusation was delivered in a strangled whisper, a frantic, desperate attempt to reconcile the impossible, to make sense of the world that had just been violently upended. The name Elias Vance sounded foreign, pathetic, on his lips now. Caleb Thorne simply smiled, a chilling, triumphant expression that held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of justice delivered. "Indeed, Mr. Finch. Elias Vance, the humble janitor, was a necessary costume. One cannot truly understand the rot in a structure without examining its foundations, can one? One cannot heal a disease without first understanding its insidious spread." His gaze, now piercing and intelligent, locked onto Marcus's, stripping away every last vestige of the manager's former bravado. "And what I found, Mr. Finch, was a structure so riddled with your particular brand of avarice, your cruelty, and your utter disregard for human decency, that it was on the verge of collapsing under its own corrupted weight." He then turned to the astonished faces of the other managers, their expressions ranging from utter terror to desperate calculation. "For the past few months, I have observed this company, not from the top, where everything is polished and presented, where numbers are manipulated and truths are obscured, but from the very bottom. I have witnessed the fear you have instilled, the talent you have stifled, the potential you have crushed, and the very soul of Viridian that you have systematically stripped away, piece by agonizing piece." His voice rose slightly, filling the room with an undeniable power, a force that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. "This is no longer the company my brother and I built, a place of innovation and integrity. This is a hollow shell, driven by profit at any human cost. And that, I assure you, ends today." Suddenly, the door to the boardroom opened again, and in walked Arthur Thorne, Caleb's younger brother, the current CEO. His face was pale, drawn, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. He had clearly just received the news of the hostile takeover, the news that his brother, whom he thought was living a quiet retirement, had just wrestled his empire back from his grasp. "See, Caleb? What is the meaning of this?" he stammered, looking from his brother, whom he barely recognized in this context, to the assembled, terrified managers, whose terrified faces mirrored his own internal turmoil. Caleb's gaze softened infinitesimally as he looked at Arthur, a flicker of old pain, of deep, enduring sorrow, in his eyes. The years of shared dreams, of brotherhood, weighed heavily on him. "Arthur," he said, his voice quieter now, filled with a profound sorrow, a lament for what had been lost between them. "This is the meaning of a dream stolen, a legacy corrupted. I bought back what was ours. What you allowed to become a monster." He turned back to the room, his expression hardening once more, the warmth towards Arthur instantly replaced by the cold resolve of the founder. "And now, we begin the cleansing." The weight of his words, and the power they represented, finally crushed all hope from Marcus Finch's face. He knew, with an icy certainty, that his reign, and perhaps his entire career, was truly over. His self-made kingdom had collapsed, and he was left with nothing. The aftermath of Caleb Thorne's dramatic revelation was swift and unforgiving for those who had reveled in their cruelty, and overwhelmingly generous for the one who had demonstrated true compassion. For Marcus Finch, the fall was precipitous, a direct and devastating consequence of his own arrogance, a karmic retribution for years of unchecked abuse. He was summarily dismissed, effective immediately, escorted out of the building not by his usual fawning subordinates, who now avoided his gaze, but by Caleb's newly appointed security detail, his face a mask of disbelief and utter humiliation. His personal assets, largely tied to his performance bonuses and executive stock options, vanished overnight with the change in ownership and the forensic audit that immediately commenced, tearing through his illicit gains. The luxurious penthouse apartment, the expensive sports car, the carefully cultivated network of sycophants, all began to unravel within days, revealed as nothing more than temporary facades. Marcus, once the epitome of corporate power, found himself facing a future not of endless promotions and wealth, but of public disgrace, mounting debt, and a severely tarnished reputation that would make finding another position in the corporate world virtually impossible. His arrogant sneer had been replaced by a hollow, desperate stare, the light in his eyes extinguished, leaving only a void. He had lost everything, not just his job, but his perceived identity, the very foundation of his inflated self-worth. The narrator observed this downfall with a detached, almost clinical satisfaction. It was a just and fitting end for a man who had built his empire on the backs of others' fear. For Seraphina, the revelation was a dizzying whirlwind of shock, disbelief, and a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had been called into Caleb Thorne's newly established private office, a place of hushed opulence she had never dared to imagine entering, the polished wood and soft lighting a stark contrast to the harsh fluorescent glow of the open-plan office. She sat across from him, still reeling from the news that the kind old janitor, Elias Vance, the man she'd offered a cup of coffee to, was in fact the legendary Caleb Thorne, the very founder of Viridian. Her mind struggled to reconcile the two images, yet the warmth in his eyes was undeniably the same. "Seraphina," Caleb began, his voice gentle, a stark contrast to the stern tone he had used with the others, filled with genuine warmth. "I want to thank you. Your small acts of kindness, your compassion, your genuine humanity in an environment that actively discouraged it, that sought to crush it, they did not go unnoticed. You were a beacon, a flickering light in the pervasive darkness that had consumed this company." He saw the humility in her eyes, the disbelief. Seraphina, still overwhelmed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, could only stammer, "But, Mr. Thorne, I only offered you coffee. I only helped with a cart. It was nothing. Anyone would have done it." She believed it to be true, unable to comprehend the profound impact of her simple gestures. Caleb chuckled softly, a genuine, hearty sound that filled the room. "It was everything, Seraphina. It was the proof I needed that the soul of Viridian was not entirely lost, that there were still good people here, people who embodied the very values Arthur and I founded this company upon. And for that, I believe you deserve more than just gratitude." He pushed a document across the desk towards her, a pristine white sheet bearing the company's logo, far removed from the cluttered, chaotic papers of her old desk. Seraphina's eyes widened as she read the words, "A new employment contract." Not for a junior assistant, a cog in a large machine, but for a newly created position, Director of Employee Well-being and Engagement. The salary was exponentially higher than anything she had ever earned, enough to comfortably pay off her student loans, support her ailing mother, and finally, truly breathe, to escape the constant gnawing anxiety of financial insecurity. But it wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the recognition, the profound validation. Caleb Thorne was giving her the power to implement the very values she believed in, to help rebuild Viridian's culture into one of genuine respect and support, to foster the very empathy that had been so cruelly suppressed. This can't be real, she whispered, her voice trembling, tears now blurring the words on the page. I don't know what to say. Her heart pounded with a mixture of overwhelming gratitude and utter disbelief. Say nothing, Serafina, Caleb replied, a warm smile on his face, his eyes twinkling. Just accept. This is not charity, it is an investment. An investment in the kind of human decency that Viridian desperately needs more of. And as for your living situation, he continued, gesturing to another document, a deed of ownership, I've also arranged for the purchase of a small, comfortable home for you, fully paid for, closer to the main office. You've worked too many late nights, sleeping on buses and trains, and I believe a good night's sleep in a place you can truly call your own, a place of peace and security, is long overdue. Serafina stared at him, tears now streaming freely down her face, blurring the grand office, blurring the man before her. A home? Her own home? She, who had struggled for years, living paycheck to paycheck, sharing a cramped apartment to save money, always dreaming of a safe haven. This was beyond her wildest dreams, a miracle she could scarcely comprehend. She couldn't speak, only nod, her heart overflowing with a mixture of shock, profound gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of validation. She had done nothing extraordinary, only acted from her heart, extended a simple kindness, and now, her life was irrevocably changed, transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Months passed, and Viridian Innovations underwent a profound transformation. Under Caleb Thorne's direct leadership, the company began to shed its cutthroat skin, slowly, deliberately, healing its internal wounds. Marcus Finch's former domain was now overseen by a new, empathetic leadership team carefully selected by Caleb, including Serafina, who embraced her new role with quiet determination and genuine passion, becoming a true champion for the employees. The fear that had once permeated the offices gradually dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and mutual respect. Employees were encouraged to innovate, to collaborate, to share ideas freely, and most importantly, to treat each other with dignity, fostering a culture where every voice mattered. The sterile, profit-driven environment slowly gave way to one that hummed with creativity and a sense of shared community, a return to the original vision. Caleb, now back in his rightful place at the helm, found a profound peace in orchestrating this systemic change, in healing the wounds his company had inflicted, in restoring its lost soul. His brother, Arthur, though initially reeling from the shock and the public humiliation of the takeover, eventually came to understand the depth of Caleb's actions. The initial bitterness gave way to a quiet, painful introspection. He saw the true cost of his ambition, the loss of integrity that had blinded him for so long, the monster he had allowed Viridian to become. Caleb, in his infinite wisdom, did not cast Arthur aside entirely but offered him a chance at redemption, a less prominent role focused on long-term ethical innovation, away from the immediate pressures of the market, a path to rediscover the true meaning of their shared dream. It was a path for Arthur to rediscover the values they once shared, to rebuild himself and, perhaps, their fractured relationship, piece by agonizing piece. Caleb Thorne, the old man who had walked among them as a forgotten janitor, now watched over his revitalized company, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He had found his answers, not in financial reports, not in market analyses, but in the simple, profound act of one human being's kindness towards another. The truth, he knew, was rarely found in the grand pronouncements of power, or in the gleaming facades of corporate success, but in the quiet, unassuming moments of everyday life, when a person's true character shines through. The narrator, observing Caleb's quiet contentment, knew the profound lesson that had been revealed. It is in the deepest shadows, when one is stripped of status and power, when one is at their most vulnerable, that the true character of a person is illuminated. And in a world often consumed by the relentless pursuit of self-interest, the quiet acts of goodness, the simple, unprompted gestures of kindness, often carry the greatest weight and, in the end, are rewarded in ways one could never possibly imagine. If you found Caleb's incredible journey and Seraphina's heartwarming reward inspiring, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of unexpected revelations and life-changing lessons. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload. And tell us in the comments below, what surprised you most about Caleb's plan? Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that made a huge difference in someone's life, or even your own? Share your thoughts, we love hearing from you.